There is an old Terran saying, older than the Imperium itself, that every war, no matter how vast or devastating, begins with a single shot. For the Imperium of Man, that shot rang out on the world of Istvaan III, when blood was drawn not from alien foes or rebellious tyrants, but from brother Astartes. But first, I wanted to hijack this video for just a moment. I've started a new YouTube channel, Vox Umbra, where I'll be uploading more 40k lore. But these lore documentaries are meant to be watched. They include all kinds of special visuals and voice-acted dialogue from within the universe, and go into much more depth into specific topics, events, and such. The Hive Fleet Behemoth video is already up, and the War in Heaven is next. Find a link in the description or the pinned comment if you're interested in checking it out. Now, back to sleep. 15 years before that fateful betrayal, Istvaan III had been brought into Imperial compliance. The campaign was led by Primarch Corax and the shadow-cloaked warriors of the Raven Guard, members of the 27th Expeditionary Fleet. The Istvanians, grim and disciplined in war, had proven no easy prey. They were professional soldiers who did not falter easily, even before the transhuman might of the Adeptus Astartes. But falter they did. At Redarth Valley, the last embers of resistance were extinguished beneath the talons of Corax's 19th Legion. The remaining Istvanian leadership knelt in surrender before the Primarch and his 800 companies. They had been adversaries, but they were welcomed into the fold, not as slaves, but as future Imperial citizens. The Imperial truth, that cold secular doctrine forged in Terra's golden halls, was to be their new scripture. To oversee this cultural transformation, the Emperor entrusted Vardis Prahl, once a major of the 11th Lastran Rifles, and now a seasoned civil servant, with the role of Imperial Planetary Governor. Prahl's mission? To uphold compliance, dismantle the old faiths, and enforce the truth. He was to be the Emperor's hand upon this world. But truth, when forced upon the faithful, often festers. Time passed. Governor Prahl tore down shrines. He cracked open the sealed vaults of ancient Istvanian cults. He declared war, not on armies, but on fear, superstition, and faith, the pillars of Istvan's culture. The results of this crusade were never known. Warp storms, writhing in the space around the system, thickened into a psychic shroud. Communication with Istvaan ceased. 6 standard years later, a faint astropathic echo clawed its way to the fringes of Imperial space. A Death Guard patrol vessel, adrift near Neo-Geddon, intercepted the broken signal. Fragmented though it was, the core message chilled the hearts of all who heard it. Istvaan III had rebelled. Prahl, the Emperor's own appointee, now led the uprising. The Coral City, Privanak, the jewel of the planet, ran red with the blood of Imperial citizens. The signal was at least 2 years old, perhaps more. It mattered not. The act of rebellion was a black stain upon the Great Crusade. The betrayal of a sworn imperial commander demanded retribution. The one to deliver that punishment would be the War Master himself, Horus Lupercal. To the Imperium, the reconquest of Istvaan III was an act of justice. To Horus, it was the perfect mask. The War Master used the opportunity not only to crush a revolt, but to gather his own strength and eliminate the loyal opposition hidden within his own legion and those of his allies. The distant location of Istvaan, along with the swirling warp storms cloaking the region, provided the perfect cover. 4 legions were summoned: the Death Guard, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, and Horus's own Sons of Horus. Under the guise of crushing rebellion, he gathered these warriors to his banner. Meanwhile, he dispatched 3 of the most loyalist legions: the Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines, to distant campaigns in the Cygnus and Viridian systems, far from the truth of what was to unfold. Other legions remained scattered across the galaxy, locked in ongoing campaigns, blind to the betrayal gestating in the heart of their own brotherhood. The word-bearers, long corrupted, were already entwined in Horus's treachery. The White Scars and Imperial Fists were too near to Terra to be approached directly, and the Thousand Suns and Space Wolves had already been consumed by the flames of Prospero. A colossal war fleet soon darkened the void around the Istvaan system. Initial battles on Istvaan Extremis, the system's outermost world, tested the mettle of the legions. In one such skirmish, Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard fought beside Lord Commander Eidolon of the Emperor's Children, striking down a powerful war singer, a psyker of forbidden strength. Garrow was gravely wounded, his torso crushed, his leg severed, and only survived due to the grisly expertise of the Emperor's Children's chief apothecary, Fabius. Eidolon, meanwhile, revealed a disturbing enhancement: a tracheal implant that allowed him to unleash a sonic scream, a weapon stolen from alien biology. It was a victory, but one that reeked of corruption. At last, Horus met in secret with Angron, Mortarion, and Eidolon aboard the Vengeful Spirit. There, the true nature of the campaign was unveiled. The Primarchs had already identified loyalist elements in their legions, battle brothers whose allegiance to the Emperor was beyond question. These warriors, if left unchecked, could endanger the entire conspiracy. And so, the plan was formed. 1/3 of each legion, those deemed suspect, were ordered to spearhead the assault on Istvaan III. Drop pods rained from orbit, filled with thousands of loyal Space Marines who believed they were fighting for the Emperor. Once planetside, they would be trapped. There would be no escape. 4 primary targets were identified in the Coral City. The Emperor's children would strike at the seat of government, aiming to capture or kill Prahl himself. The World Eaters would seize the central plazas, the arteries of movement. The Death Guard were assigned the western fortifications to isolate and destroy the entrenched defenders. And to the east, where the Siren Hold stood in eerie defiance, cloaked in the power of forbidden cults and psychic might, the sons of Horus were unleashed, with orders to annihilate everything. Additional targets, including the city's starport and infrastructure centers, were assigned to smaller strike teams. The first wave descended, a force of the Emperor's finest, unknowingly marching into the furnace of betrayal. Their war would not be one of liberation. It would be a purge. It began as iron rain, fiery trails streaking down through the skies of Istvaan III, as thousands of drop pods smashed into the surface of the Coral City. Thunder rolled across the horizon as orbital lance strikes hammered ground targets in perfect coordination, clearing the skies and granting the Space Marine Legion's absolute air superiority. This was no tentative invasion. It was annihilation incarnate. Resistance was fierce, more frenzied than the original compliance campaign that had once pacified the world. But the defenders, now half-mad, flesh-scarred zealots of Slaanesh, faced the full fury of the Emperor's Angels of Death. They wielded stolen Imperial weapons and manned expertly arranged trench networks, bristling with autocannons, mortars, and armored basilisks that emerged from hidden bunkers. Even Malkador heavy tanks rumbled up from below the earth to meet the assault. But the Death Guard were unshakable. The sons of Barbarous dropped directly into the heart of enemy fire. Artillery overshot, blinded by the audacity of the landing. And in the smoke-choked trenches of the Western Front, the Death Guard advanced, unstoppable. Terminator squads tore down gun towers and cracked open bunkers. Tactical Marines stormed the trenches in waves, bolters roaring in disciplined volleys. Above them, gunships descended to deliver Vindicators and Land Raiders, which crashed through the granite fortifications like juggernauts. The air pulsed with the thunder of close-range bombardments. And then came the Earthshakers, titans of the Legio Mortis, whose massive forms descended to the west. With their turbo blasters and Gatling guns, they reduced the bastions to molten ruin, their firepower liquefying stone and shattering defenses like wax beneath a furnace. In the city's heart, beneath the towering spires of imperial governance, came the storm of the World Eaters. The first wave hit like a meteor strike, drop pods slamming into the plaza stones and shattering the grand colonnades into rubble. The 12th Legion poured out like a swarm of steel-clad beasts, their chain blades howling as they tore into the panicked defenders. Hundreds died in moments. The scent of blood and the roar of violence flooded the city's core. And then came the Golden Fire. precision strikes descending like the wrath of gods. These were no random drops. They were aimed directly at the precentor's palace, an imposing fortress rebuilt by Imperial engineers to resist even orbital fire. It mattered not. With flawless coordination, the Emperor's children landed in tight formations at the palace's many entrances. Renowned for their precision and brutal efficiency, they surged forward in perfect rhythm. Dreadnoughts smashed open the dome from above with siege claws, while melta-guns carved new entrances through the very walls. Resistance was fierce but futile. Room by room, chamber by chamber, the Emperor's children carved their way inside. To the east lay the Siren Hold, the dark heart of the rebellion. Resembling the venting stacks of deep-sea vents, its great tomb spires stretched into the polluted skies. And it was there that the sons of Horus fell upon their prey. Their drop pods scattered under intense fire, but the 16th Legion rallied swiftly. With cold fury and battle-hardened poise, they surged into the temple complex, turning the winding catacombs into a blood-choked maze of war. There, for the first time in true force, the war sinkers revealed themselves. Witches of sound, clad in relic technology that let them float and shield themselves with walls of sonic force. Their voices shattered ceramite, burst organs, and powdered bones. Their presence sent the civilian cultists into paroxysms of zealotry, charging into the maelstrom with suicidal devotion. A terrible chorus of psychic sound swept over the coral city, an unnatural shriek that drowned even the cacophony of battle. It tore at the minds of men, driving thousands into fits of madness and hatred. Only the resilience of Astartes' will and the baffling protocols of their armor saved the Space Marines from ruin. At the walls, the Death Guard and Titans finished their grim work, reducing the fortifications to rubble. In the plaza, the World Eaters found themselves beset by madness incarnate. The population surged toward them in a sea of flesh. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Laughing, shrieking, heedless of death, the civilians charged Angron's warriors in suicidal devotion, and the World Eaters answered them. They fought back to back, frag grenades blossoming through human waves, heavy bolters and missile launchers running dry as they carved a mountain of corpses at their feet. Inside the Siren Hold and Precentor's palace, the battle raged inch by inch. The war singers cut down many before they were slain. Strange, elite defenders emerged, black-armored cultists wielding relic weapons that unleashed sonic blasts and liquid metal darts. In the deepest reaches of the tomb spires, Captain Garviel Loken led a spearhead into a blood-slick shrine, later named Death's Tomb. There, amidst 4 idols and rotting corpses, he and his warriors brought low the last of the war singers. At the same moment, a strike force of Emperor's children led by the famed Captain Lucius, fought their way into the throne room of the traitor himself, Vardis Prahl. Clad in warped, Baroque power armor and wielding psycho-sonic weaponry, Prahl unleashed all the foul power of his arcane rebellion. But it was not enough. In a desperate duel, Lucius slew him, cutting down the master of the cult with brutal precision. With Prahl's fall and the destruction of the Death Tomb Shrine, the city's psychic scream faltered and collapsed. Resistance vanished with it. By nightfall, the rebellion was in ruins. The objectives were secured, the defenders slain in the tens of thousands. The Space Marines, bloodied, battered, victorious, celebrated their hard-fought triumph. But even as they stood upon the corpse-strewn ground, arms raised in pride, the trap was already sprung. The true betrayal had yet to fall from the sky. The fall of the Coral City should have marked the end. Victory was achieved, the enemy routed, the objectives taken. But then silence. Communications with the orbiting Imperial fleet abruptly ceased. The Titans of Legio Mortis, those colossal gods of war, turned without a word and began a slow, deliberate march back beyond the city walls, vanishing into the plains like specters. High above, the great battleships and battle barges of the fleet, Vengeful Spirit, Firebird, Andronius, Killing Star, Indomitable Will, Gauntlet of Spire, Warchild, and the Conqueror, broke from their station-keeping patterns and descended into low orbit. Then came the fire. Decks of macro-cannon batteries ignited into salvo after salvo, ejecting a cascade of munitions into Istvaan III's lower atmosphere. But these were not high-explosive rounds or tactical penetrators. They carried the Life Eater virus, a weapon of mass extinction, Exterminatus class, permitted only by the highest authority. It was a death sentence writ across the stars, one that only the Emperor or the War Master himself could authorize. The virus was a necrophage, its action instantaneous. Within moments of impact, its dispersal agents erupted in 1,000 plumes, blanketing the city and countryside alike. It infected on contact, rotting flesh from within, drowning lungs and liquefied organs, collapsing flora into slurry, and reducing every living thing to fetid sludge. Screams were silenced as quickly as they came. In minutes, the world began to melt. Winds blew corpse vapors through the steel and stone arteries of the city, and the plains beyond curdled into blistered death. The oceans turned green, sour with decay, and from orbit, the world now resembled a cancerous orb, sickly and stained, suspended in the void. But Horus was not done. As the viral mass swelled and choked the atmosphere, A single lance strike from the vengeful spirit punched into the miasma. The air caught fire. Flames howled across continents, igniting a firestorm that stripped the surface to bare rock. Entire cities exploded. Gas lines ruptured into infernos. Towers twisted and toppled in burning cascades. And everything, flesh, steel, stone, was incinerated in a gale of living flame. Istvaan III became a torch in the dark. Those Astartes who had weathered the virus by sealing themselves in airtight shelters found themselves beset by fire, the air around them igniting as they scrambled for cover once more. But there was no cover from this, not from the betrayal, not from the flames. By the time silence fell upon the command decks of the vengeful spirit, 8 billion souls were gone. The galaxy, unknowingly, had just crossed into civil war. Yet, even as Horus's hammer fell, his plans had already begun to unravel. Among the stars, aboard the orbiting fleet, some had discovered the truth. Some had resisted. Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard, a veteran of Terra, and one of the 14th Legion's earliest recruits, had sensed the stench of betrayal. Acting swiftly, he rallied loyalists and took command of the frigate Eisenstein, broadcasting warnings to the brothers below, those still unaware of what was to come. Elsewhere, in the fleet of the Emperor's children, Captain Saul Tarvitz, a line officer long suspicious of his legion's secrecy, made his own discovery mere minutes before the bombardment. Unable to prevent it, he commandeered a Thunderhawk gunship and flew to the surface, bringing his warning with him. Thanks to these 2 men, many received the message. They found shelter, sealed bunkers, bastions, even the catacombs beneath the Siren Hold. They survived. But not all were so lucky. The World Eaters, stationed furthest from secure shelter, bore the brunt of the virus strike. Some reached safety. Most did not. Even their power armor, though sealed, could not wholly protect against the virulent rot. The virus worked through cracks, through battle damage, through seams. Superhuman warriors screamed, and that, more than anything, told of its horror. Even many who reached cover died after sealing themselves in, bringing the infection inside with them. And those who survived the virus met the fire, and there was no sanctuary in flame. In orbit, loyalists who were not assigned to the ground attack found themselves betrayed as well, knives in the dark. Traitor Marines turning on their own ships, cutting down Imperial Army soldiers, iterators, and functionaries. Some resisted, some fled. Some fought shipboard wars that delayed or disrupted the War Master's plan. On board the torpedo monitor, Duquois, Loyalist forces held out. They turned their guns on traitor vessels, destroying escorts and crippling the Killing Star before they were overwhelmed and annihilated. The Mechanicus vessel, Xerxes 977, late to the fleet and uninformed of Horus's betrayal, refused to surrender. It had to be brought down by force, its hulk spiraling into the fires below. And aboard the heavy cruiser Sunstone, the Terran Duke Mortector led his lifeguard in a deck-by-deck battle against a delegation of Emperor's children, attempting to seize the vessel and assassinate the Emperor's representative. The final fate of the Sunstone is unknown, only that it ended in a cataclysmic magazine explosion, scattering wreckage into the black. Amid the chaos, Garrow knew what must be done. The Eisenstein, lightly armed, had no hope against Horus's fleet, but fortune favored them. Their position at the fleet's rear gave them a sliver of opportunity. Faking a reactor malfunction, they dropped back from formation under the pretext of standard safety protocol. It wouldn't hold long. First Captain Callus Typhon, the Death Guard, soon noted the silence from his subordinate, Ignatius Grolgor, already slain aboard the Eisenstein, and gave chase aboard the fearsome Terminus Est. The Eisenstein was battered, nearly destroyed by the larger ship's fire. Her astropaths were dead, her navigator dying, but she escaped, making a blind warp jump, vanishing from the Istvaan system. No one knew if she would survive, but she carried the truth. Down below, the fires at last guttered out. Auspex sweeps and surveyor scans began to comb the charred surface of Istvaan III, expecting nothing more than echoes of death. What they found shocked them. Nearly 100,000 loyalist Astartes had been on the surface during the bombardment, drawn from the sons of Horus, the Emperor's children, the Death Guard, and the World Eaters. Despite the virus, despite the firestorm, a staggering 2/3 of them had survived. Sheltered in bunkers and bastions, warned just in time, they had trusted to training, equipment, and gene-forged resilience, and endured. Now, they rose from the ashes. As storms broke over the scarred land, communications burst to life. Vox channels crackled. Signals screamed across the ruin. There were demands, curses, cries of fury and heartbreak, words spoken in betrayal. Never before had the legions of Astartes turned so terribly upon their own. Now, on the ashen bones of Istvaan III, the Loyalists prepared to answer that betrayal with vengeance. The failure of the virus bombing to annihilate the Loyalists sent ripples of chaos through Horus's already fraying plans. As he scrambled to reassert control and began drafting orders for a conventional orbital bombardment, the situation was torn from his grasp. Acting without orders, and perhaps stoked by whispers from within his own ranks, or simply driven by the savage impulse to personally end those who had once followed him, Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, unleashed his fury. From the Conqueror, the flagship of his legion, Angron led the charge. A vanguard of gunships streaked towards Istvaan III, followed closely by a second wave of drop pods. At the forefront was the Red Angel himself, descending into the ash-scoured plazas west of the Precentor's palace, with 50 companies of blood-hungry world eaters at his back. Horus and his inner circle could only watch in seething outrage. Angron had acted without sanction, throwing the entire battle plan into disarray. Yet down he came, and down came his sons, the skies above the ruined city churning with thunderhawks and storm eagles. Their strafing runs were met with sporadic but immediate return fire. They had found the loyalists. Angron roared from the hold of his gunship and slammed into the cracked and blackened bones that paved the plazas like withered leaves in a dead forest. His axes, Gore Father and Gore Child, screamed with the same anticipation that burned behind the Primarch's eyes. Fire lashed out from the broken skyline, but it did not slow him. He strode through it all, a mythic beast of battle reborn in the crucible of betrayal. Behind him, his legionnaires formed into a serrated arrowhead, pale ceramite and shimmering metal gleaming with battle lust. The butcher's nails, embedded in their skulls, shrieked for slaughter, their need to kill no longer suppressed. And from the fractured edges of the plaza, the loyalists came to meet them. No less world eaters, no less blood-soaked, but now their fury burned not with implants, but with betrayal. At their head was Brother Captain Erlin, a veteran of countless victories under the very Primarch who now marched to destroy them. Around 2,000 loyalist Astartes stood with him, world eaters who had survived the firestorm by taking shelter in nearby bunkers under false orders warning of an Istvanian suicide weapon. The rest of their scattered brethren still fought across the broken city. Now faced with double their number, traitors all, and Angron himself, the loyalist embraced madness. A suicidal determination took root. If they were to die, then so too would the betrayers they dragged into the grave beside them. Without formation or finesse, both sides charged. Brother fell upon brother in a tide of wrath. The impact was catastrophic. Astartes against Astartes, matched in strength, fury, and skill. Hundreds were tore apart in minutes. Erlin was overwhelmed by dozens of traitors, dismembered as he cursed their names with his dying breath. Dreadnoughts detonated in the blaze of Melta fire, throwing fire and shrapnel through the carnage. Here, in the plazas of the Coral City, a bitter truth was made manifest. The old logic of imperial war no longer applied. There would be no broken morale, no outmaneuvered enemy, no victory through attrition alone. When superhuman met superhuman, only ruin could follow. Armor cracked not from one blow, but 20. Guns ran dry, blades shattered from overuse. and still they fought. Each death came at the cost of another. Among the blood and ruin, Angron was a force of nature, unrelenting, unkillable. He carved a red path through the melee, flesh and armor alike falling to his axes. Nothing stopped him. No bolter, blade, or defiance could stay his hand. The Red Angel roared the names of those he slew, as though their deaths were sacraments. And when the last loyalist fell, and the thunderous clash ebbed into silence, the traitor stood amid the ruins, victorious. If such a word held any meaning in the face of such atrocity. Their white and blue armor was now drowned in gore, surrounded by the shredded dead and caked ash. Angron surveyed the horror and declared, "It is well done." Then, without hesitation, he ordered his legion to fan out through the city, to find more survivors, and to kill. Thus the true butchery began. This was the first time the Astartes turned fully upon one another. No quarter, no mercy, no forgiveness. Just vengeance, treachery, and war. Horus was livid. Angron's disobedience had jeopardized the delicate plan he had so carefully constructed. To eliminate the Loyalists with minimal risk and without wasting valuable forces. That plan now lay in ruin. Yet Angron had forced his hand. Horus could not afford to strike the surface again with bombardment, not without incinerating the World Eaters as well, risking the wrath of their fleet, a potential civil war within the rebellion itself. Nor could he leave the Loyalists to regroup. They had to be crushed, now. With no other choice, Horus committed to a ground war. But the War Master saw an opportunity in this chaos. Rather than rely on a single legion to finish the job, he would draw all his followers into the bloodshed. Every force under his command would taste brother's blood. Every hand would be stained. In this shared betrayal, their paths would be sealed. No turning back, no room for doubt. The Emperor's children came next. Lord Commander Eidolon, perhaps eager to atone for the embarrassment Saul Tarvitz had brought upon them, moved swiftly. His troops landed with methodical precision in the burned-out remains of a park and market plaza several kilometers south of the precentor's palace. Without delay, Eidolon ordered his forces to form up in advance, confident the survivors ahead were shattered remnants. Meanwhile, more World Eaters arrived, reinforcing Angron's bloody tide. Death Guard and Sons of Horus gunships scoured the outskirts of the Coral City, dropping seeker squads and reconnaissance units into the ruins to hunt Loyalists, assuming this to be the final phase of a successful purge. But they were wrong. Eidolon's column soon discovered the precentor's palace was anything but a broken shell. The Loyalist Emperor's children still held it, and held it well. The traitor assault was met with withering fire. Eidolon's forces were stalled, then pushed back in retreat, leaving behind scorched wreckage and crumbled dead. Repeated attempts to push through were shattered by ambushes and redoubts hastily erected from the ruins, each effort costing more lives. Elsewhere, the gunship patrols fared no better. The ruined sprawl of the Coral City swallowed aspect scans, cloaking the Loyalists' movements. Bolts of las cannon fire and missile trails lit the sky from positions the traitors had once known themselves. Now the enemy used that knowledge against them. And then came the final humiliation. One Storm Eagle gunship, identified as belonging to the Sons of Horus and cleared for landing aboard the strike cruiser Minotaur, was revealed to be a weapon of vengeance. Its pilot, broadcasting over open Vox, cried, "Avenge the blood of Terra," before ramming the vessel into the ship's rearming bay. Its las cannons tore through supply lines. The resulting explosion killed an entire company of Horus's own warriors. Panic surged through traitor ranks. Communications scrambled again. Vox codes were reissued. The Minotaur burned, and the cost of treachery mounted. Far from a clean execution, the Loyalists were rising, and they would not die quietly. Night fell over Istvaan III like a burial shroud. The sky, once scorched with fire, now bled ash and dust from the upper atmosphere, the lingering aftermath of the planet-spanning firestorm. From that poisoned firmament came rain, torrential, continent-wide deluges born of a world's agony. The heat, still rising from the ruined ground, twisted the winds into hurricane-force gales that tore through the wreckage of Coral City. Streets became rivers of cinders. The shattered remnants of city blocks groaned under the lash of ash storms, and thunder rolled through the broken skyline as lightning blinded the heavens. Vox links crackled and failed. Auspex sweeps turned to static. Air support was grounded. The surface of Istvaan III, once under the careful scrutiny of the trader fleet, now lay effectively cut off, swallowed by the wrath of the very weapon they had unleashed. Though the virus bombing had succeeded in its horrific slaughter of civilians, the next phase, the clean eradication of the Loyalist Astartes, was fast becoming a strategic catastrophe. The storm cloaked the defenders. The shattered city became their fortress. The Emperor's children had failed to break the Loyalist lines. Angron's world eaters had vanished into the northern ruins. A rabid tide even their commanders couldn't recall or rein in. Probing flights by traitor gunships yielded nothing but downed aircraft and sudden, sharp engagements with hidden enemies. The Loyalists, though vastly outnumbered, refused to die, and they fought with purpose. The Coral City, once a place of music, now a morgue, echoed once more with the sound of war. The Loyalists pulled their enemies into tight, charred ruins, into dead-end streets and broken spires, where the traitors' greater numbers and firepower meant nothing. Running battles flared through the blackened tenements. Each corner turned was a trap, every street a battleground. The loyal forces concentrated their efforts in 3 key locations: The northwestern city blocks, the blood-soaked courtyards of the precentor's palace, and the labyrinthian death trap that was the Siren Hold. Horus and his generals could no longer doubt it. Beneath the city, in tunnels and sewer systems, through miles of half-collapsed catacombs, the Loyalists were regrouping, consolidating, plotting vengeance with sharpened blades. And so the war ground on. Horus still had the titans of the Legio Mortis in reserve, but not even god machines could navigate the ash-choked streets or see through the storm's veil. Deploying them in such chaos would be madness. And so days turned to weeks. The storm did not lift. The world itself seemed determined to punish all who fought upon it. And within that darkness, battle raged. In skeletal habitation towers and corpse-choked sewage networks, Astartes met Astartes in brutal, close-quarter slaughter. Blades sang, bolters howled. The traitor reinforcements arrived only in pieces, staggered and unreliable, forced to rely on precarious drop pod deliveries for ammunition. The defenders knew every inch of the ruins. The attackers advanced only through the price of blood. In the southern industrial sector, Vindicator and Predator tanks clawed their way forward, street by street. The Loyalist ambushes struck like scythe blades. Sniper fire from broken windows, meltas from sewer gates, missiles fired from behind toppled smokestacks. Progress was slow, costly. Every meter was won with lives. In the Siren Hold, a transformation occurred. There, where once the proud green livery of the Sons of Horus had adorned the warriors of the 16th Legion, blackened hands now scraped away the warplate's heraldry. Paint peeled, symbols were struck off. The name of Horus was spat upon. They had become the Luna Wolves again, reborn in the betrayal's fire. At their head was Captain Garviel Loken, once beloved of the War Master, once a core member of the fabled Mournival. Loken now led the resistance with steel-eyed clarity, betrayed, abandoned, but alive. From the Hold's haunted towers to the scorched south and east, Loken coordinated the Loyalists like a ghost general, striking where the enemy least expected, always one step ahead, preventing encirclement with daring counterattacks and devastating ambushes. To the south, the precentor's palace remained a bastion of survival and defiance. Again and again, Eidolon hurled his emperor's children at its fortified bulk. Again and again, they were repelled. Captain Saul Tarvitz and his defenders held firm, wielding salvaged heavy weapons and half-repaired tanks salvaged from previous assaults. And with them stood a symbol of undying defiance, ancient Rylanor, the venerable dreadnought of the Third Legion, once a hero to all, had become a living monument to what the Emperor's children once were. Time and again, the traitors believed him destroyed, only for Rylanor to rise from the dust, weapons blazing, defying his fallen brothers in the Emperor's name. Worse still for the traitors, their lines were harried by Loyalist world eaters, some driven by justice, others perhaps by nothing more then bloodlust turned against friend and foe alike. These warbands struck with feral precision, slaughtering, stealing munitions, and vanishing again into the ruins. But nowhere was the fighting more dire than to the northwest. There, entrenched within the old Istvaanian bunkers and trench networks, were the Death Guard loyalists. Armed with weapons pulled from ancient vaults, they held strong. But they were surrounded. From within the city, Angron's berserkers tore at them with unrelenting fury, burrowing through tunnels, heedless of casualties, leaving slaughter in their wake. And from beyond the walls came the Reaper himself, Mortarion. Through the hurricane, he came aboard the Omen, an ancient assault ship of grim majesty. With tactical precision, Mortarion ordered its guns to sweep the approach clean, annihilating any position that could conceal a trap. Then he unleashed his legion. Through howling ash winds and lightning-lit dark, the Death Guard advanced in lockstep. Spartan transports groaning through the rubble, Fellblade and Typhon tanks rolling like titans of old. At their head walked Mortarion, grim and silent, counting the dead with every stride. The siege had begun in earnest. North of the ruined Imperial starport, perhaps 5 or 6 kilometers beyond the wreckage, buried deep beneath storm-blasted ash and crumbled stone, something ancient stirred. Unseen beneath the roaring winds and flickering lightning of Istvaan III's poisoned skies, a massive brazen orb began to shift. Grinding against the blackened soil, it slowly rotated free of the earth with deliberate strength, forcing itself upward through the choking layers of debris. Hours passed before the upper shell split open, its surface unfurling like a vast clockwork flower, each bronze petal bladed and jagged, spreading outward with mechanical precision. What rose from the ash was not alien. It was known. At least, it would have been, had any soul survived nearby to name it. A siege crucible of the Ordo Reductor, launched into the firestorm in the final moments of the doomed Loyalist Mechanicum ship Xerxes 977. The crucible was a relic of war, a cousin in purpose and design to a Space Marine drop pod, but on a scale more vast and encased in near impervious armor. It had survived its descent intact, burying itself like a meteor rather than shattering on impact. But no living flesh, even Astartes, could have survived such a fall. Its passengers, however, were not made of flesh. They were machine-born and logic-forged. Magos Reductor Calum Decima and his Thalax cohort, cyborg killers without warmth or wrath. Their arrival carried no hatred, only cold arithmetic. To them, the destruction of the traitors was not vengeance, it was necessity. Nearly 2 full solar months passed before the choking storms of Istvaan III finally began to wane. The fire-swept skies cleared just enough for the traitors to resume mass landings. In that time, blood had soaked the stones of the Coral City. For every block the traitors took, they had paid dearly. Estimates whispered of 20,000 loyalist Astartes dead, and twice that number of attackers. Still, the precentor's palace stood, held by warriors who would not yield. Loken's Luna wolves stalked the Siren hold, turning the maze of ruins into a trap of corpses. Yet elsewhere, the tide had begun to turn. In the northwest, Mortarian's Death Guard pressed forward with grim resolve, crushing resistance between the city walls and the hammer blows of advancing legions. The Loyalists were squeezed into a shrinking kill zone, their options few. But even amongst the Death Guard, loyalties fractured. Several of their siege engine crews, Terran-born warriors who had once sworn loyalty to the Emperor, not Mortarian, broke ranks. Some refused to fire. Others turned their mighty siege cannons against the very legions they once called brothers. For 5 brutal hours, a civil war within the civil war erupted. The veil of grief. Discipline faltered, order collapsed, friend and foe bled as one in the confusion. Marshal Durak Rask, commander of the traitor Death Guard assault, was cut down by Chrysos Morturg and his loyalist destroyer squad. In the chaos, even Mortarian himself was wounded, burned by plasma fire from a Predator tank, still painted in the Legion's livery. He answered that betrayal with rage, tearing the tank to scrap alongside his death shroud. Only by ordering a withdrawal did Mortarian halt the carnage, just long enough for a pocket of loyalist Death Guard to escape his closing grasp. Then came the reckoning. As the clouds thinned, fresh waves of traitor Astartes and war machines descended. Mortarian wasted no time. He turned his full might upon the embattled loyalist enclave, crushing them beneath a storm of steel. The few heavy tanks the loyalists had, Malcadors salvaged from Istvaan's defense vaults and seized traitor armor, were no match. Fellblade squadrons and Legio Mortis Titans pulverized their positions from afar. Wave after wave of Death Guard surged forward, shoulder to shoulder, their bolters barking in unison. Against this unending tide, the defenders stood defiant. They fired until their guns overheated and cracked. They held until their ammunition ran dry. But even courage has its limits. The Death Guard overran them, sweeping through trenches and barricades like a black tide. Those few that survived fell back into the subsurface tunnels, collapsing them behind them in desperation. But even underground there would be no escape. The traitors had come prepared. Vortex charges and Hades drills cleared the way, and Mortarian followed. Above ground, the battle reignited in full. To the southwest of the city, a Sons of Horus force made planetfall, 30 companies strong, led by First Captain Ezekiel Abaddon and his elite Justaran Terminators. Backed by heavy armor, they carved a path through the ruins, wiping out any loyalists they encountered with methodical brutality. Now committed fully, the War Master brought his full weight to bear. Massive orbital conveyors darkened the skies, delivering reinforcements from Legio Mortis and Legio Audax, titans untouched since the firestorm, warlords, reavers, dozens of warhounds, and at their head, the monstrous Dies Array, an Imperator battle-class titan, towering above the ruins like a walking cathedral of annihilation. Where its feet fell, the earth split. Where its guns fired, city blocks vanished. But it was not just titans and legions that landed. In the shadows of their great transports came strange vessels. Insectile black gunships, riding columns of blue flame, and battered civilian lighters adorned with flayed skin and blasphemous symbols. From the former emerged the heretics of the Dark Mechanicum, armed with twisted machines and flanked by skittering spider skulls and monstrous battle automata, titanic things larger even than a dreadnought. And worse still, from the corpse-decorated lighters came the witch priests of the Serpent Lodge of Davin, their very presence an affront to nature. Even hardened Astartes recoiled at their approach. They carried with them the stink of the warp, an unseen blight that tainted the very air. The tide had turned. The Loyalists, though unbroken, were outmatched. Every death now weighed heavier, every brother lost irreplaceable. And Horus had the numbers, the guns, and the monsters to finish what he had started. The math of war, the logic of slaughter, was now irrefutably in the traitors' favor. Their victory inevitable, their vengeance near. The shattered skyline of Coral City trembled as the Titans came within range of their target. The high curtain walls of the Precentor's palace loomed ahead, already scorched and battered from earlier assaults. There, the traitor Emperor's children were engaged in a renewed siege, exchanging blistering fire with the Loyalist defenders entrenched behind the ancient bastions. But the engines of the Legio Mortis had been given no orders to discriminate between friend or foe. With a deafening chorus of war sirens, the Titans sounded their judgment. And then came the wrath. Volcano cannons screamed. Turbo laser clusters stitched the sky with arcs of pure light. The air turned to fire and smoke as the very ground quaked beneath the colossal fury unleashed. The curtain walls, once crafted to withstand a world in rebellion, now fell before godlike power. The bastion's dome collapsed in on itself. The towers within flattened like toys beneath a giant's heel. As the barrage faded and dust choked the air like falling ash, only ruin remained. From the chaos, a new sound arose, a bloodthirsty howl. Angron's World Eater surged forward, the Red Angel himself leading the charge. All that remained for the Loyalists was to sell their lives dearly. As the war dragged on, loyalty frayed. Captain Lucius of the Emperor's Children, consumed by envy of Saul Tarvitz, turned his heart to treachery. In secret, he contacted Lord Commander Eidolon, offering to betray his brothers and open the gates of the Loyalist line in exchange for rejoining the ranks of the traitors. The pact was sealed in blood. With cold precision, Lucius butchered 30 loyalist Astartes, clearing a path for the final assault. Having earned back the favor of his legion, Lucius confronted Tarvitz and challenged him to a duel. The two brothers clashed, and though Tarvitz emerged the victor, Lucius fled, his bargain fulfilled. Elsewhere in the dying city, another reckoning unfolded. Captain Garviel Loken and his Luna Wolves, no longer sons of Horus, prepared for their end at the Siren Hold. It was Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the Traitor Legion, who led the assault, with orders to return only in triumph. The attack came from above and below. Assault rams punched through the tomb spires. Jump pack squads fell from the sky like thunderbolts. Tanks rumbled through cracked avenues, smashing through barricades and shrines alike. The black-armored Justarin, the elite of the first company, led the charge. Loken's defenders fought with the fury of the betrayed. Ammunition ran low. Casualties mounted. Some tried to escape, knowing that living to resist again was its own form of victory. Others stood their ground, trading blood for time. The Justarin smashed through marble and stone, bringing death in waves. The Siren Hold fell within an hour. Abaddon prowled the ruins, his triumph hollow. He cursed his warriors for their failure to crush the Loyalists utterly. His orders were clear: fan out, search the ruins, and finish what had begun. Soon, the catacombs beneath Siren Hold were choked with phosphex smoke. Davenite witches and chaos cultists stalked the depths with unholy purpose. And amidst the hunt, a fateful encounter unfolded. In the charred ruins of Coral City, two duels sealed the fate of the old Mournival. Loken and Tarek Torgadon, defenders of honor, clashed with Abaddon and Horus Aximent, traitors made executioner. Torgadon fell to Aximon in a brutal single combat. Loken, though valiant, was grievously wounded by Abaddon and left broken, unable to flee the orbital bombardment that soon followed. Darkness claimed the city once more. Titans stalked its corpse. Gunfire echoed like distant screams. The final phase had begun. Not battle, but slaughter. Loyalists were no longer foes, but prey. Though the Loyalists were shattered, they would not die quietly. Every moment they resisted bled the traitors. Every Astartes that fell cost Horus more than he could afford. The arrival of Fulgrim only sharpened the urgency. Time was slipping away. The Emperor would learn of the treachery soon. Reluctantly, Horus gave the order to withdraw. Fulgrim and Mortarion were tasked with dragging Angron from the battlefield. In parting, Horus turned the guns of the vengeful spirit once more to the Coral City. Not with virus bombs this time, but with fire. He leveled it with high explosive, burying the last cries of defiance under tons of rock and fury. Earthquakes tore through Istvaan III. Structures collapsed as brothers fought beneath crumbling ruins. In pockets of resistance across the planet, loyalists made their final stands, dragging traitors with them into death. The echoes of Istvaan III would ring for millennia. The planet became a grave, its cities twisted skeletons, its air thick with ash and the stench of treachery. Horus had tried to kill in silence, to end resistance before the galaxy could see. But Saul Tarvitz ruined that design. Flying into the jaws of death, Tarvitz had warned his brothers. Because of him, 2/3 of the Loyalist forces survived the virus bombing. A line officer once considered unremarkable had altered the course of history. Though he and the Emperor Children's Loyalists ultimately perished, they bought the Imperium time. Garviel Loken also endured. Cast down by Abaddon, buried in the bombardment, he should have died. But fate, or perhaps the Emperor, had other plans. When he clawed free from the rubble months later, Loken had lost everything. His memory, his identity, even his name. He called himself Cerberus, the Hound of Death, believing death itself had rejected him. He hunted those who remained, believing himself the last Loyalist alive. But he was not alone. Nathaniel Garrow, Death Guard turned Loyalist, now an agent of the Emperor, returned to Istvaan III to find Loken. What he discovered was a haunted ruin, and whispers of a monster in the shadows. The Cerberus of the wasteland fought him, nearly killing him, until the truth was uncovered. The virus bombing had weakened the veil between realms. The survivors were not men, but plague zombies, demon-tainted horrors of Nurgle. Garrow and Loken fought side by side to purge the blight, and when the battle was done, Garrow reached out once more to the man beneath the madness. Loken remembered. With his soul reclaimed, and the past no longer forgotten, Garviel Loken joined Garrow's cause. Together, they departed the ruin of Istvaan III, bound for Luna, and waiting for the presence of Malkador the Sigillite. The Inquisition was about to begin. The third planet of the Istvaan system, once vibrant and comfortably nestled close enough to its sun to sustain human life, had become a virus-soaked tomb, the first mark of Horus Lupercal's wrath. In the wake of what would be known as the Istvaan III atrocity, the world stood in ruin. Its population had been rendered into nothing more than contaminated ash. The continents, now lifeless and charred, bore only blackened smears of once proud cities, now reduced to burned-out skeletons of stone. A single day of unrelenting orbital bombardment had eradicated a civilization. From above, the War Master's fleet had unleashed incendiary shells and biological warheads with a fury that spared neither soldier nor civilian. Istvaan III now drifted in mournful silence, a scarred planetary tombstone, monument to the first true act of heresy. With the last loyal warriors dead beneath its ashen skies, the traitor legions turned their eyes to Istvaan V. A grand flotilla arrived, bearing the military pride of 4 entire Space Marine legions, now devoted not to the Emperor, but to Horus, with them came millions of Imperial Army troops ferried by vast conveyors, their tanks and artillery bristling with readiness. From within the bloated hulls of dark mechanicum ships strode the towering god machines of the Legio Mortis, their priest engineers ready to breathe life into the Titans once more. Victory on Istvaan III had come at a cost, but it forged the traitor legions in fire and blood. They were ready now, honed for a war that would see brother fight against brother. The loyalists, Horus claimed, were not yet prepared for that grim truth, that hesitation would be their undoing. Even as Horus moved against Istvaan III, he dispatched Fulgrim, the Phoenician, and Primarch of the Emperor's children, to sway his closest brother, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands. The War Master hoped that Fulgrim's bond with Ferrus might secure another ally to his rebellion. Fulgrim had already sent most of his 3rd Legion and the 28th Expeditionary Fleet on ahead to join Horus in the Istvaan system, while he assisted Ferrus's 52nd Expeditionary Fleet in purging orcs from Colonides IV. The friendship between the two was legendary, and Fulgrim believed that he could convince Ferrus of the righteousness of Horus's cause. But he was wrong. Their meeting, held in the Anvilarium aboard the Fist of Iron, ended in outrage. Ferrus Manus was horrified that his brothers would betray the Emperor, and his fury ignited into violence. He struck at Fulgrim with his necrodermis-forged hands, attempting to shatter the golden blade Fireblade. But the sword held. Its defiance exploded in Ferrus's grip, knocking him unconscious. Fulgrim, now tormented by the demonic whispers of Slaanesh, stood poised to kill his brother with the Warhammer Forgebreaker, a gift he had once forged in love. But he could not bring himself to strike. Instead, he took the hammer and left behind Fireblade in its place, a bitter inversion of their brotherhood. Emerging from the sanctum, Fulgrim gave the signal to his Phoenix Guard. They executed the Iron Hands Morlocks, Ferrus's own elite Terminators, without hesitation. First Captain Gabriel Santor barely escaped. Fulgrim fled aboard the Firebird, while his warships opened fire on Ferrus's fleet. The surprise attack crippled the Iron Hands, allowing the Emperor's children to disappear into the warp and rejoin their brethren in the Istvaan system. Though Horus raged at Fulgrim's failure to sway Ferrus, there was no time to dwell. The War Master needed Istvaan V fortified, and he tasked Fulgrim with overseeing that work. Fulgrim, insulted by the perceived menial labor, was appeased only when Horus insisted the task was critical. So, Fulgrim set to work in the ruins of ancient alien fortresses, overseeing dark mechanicum laborers as they sculpted black sand into trenches, redoubts, and artillery nests. Anti-air batteries lined the defenses, and mobile torpedo launchers were hidden within the ancient ruins. Fulgrim made his bastion atop the Urgal Plateau, transforming the remains of an alien keep into a fortress worthy of the War Master himself. If the Emperor's legions wanted a reckoning, they would have descended into this fortified hell to earn it. Enraged by the betrayal at Istvaan III, Ferrus Manus welcomed the Emperor's command delivered through Rogel Dorn with zealous resolve. Dorn, acting under the Emperor's authority, had learned of Horus's treachery from the survivors of the Eisenstein. As Magister Militum, he ordered 8 legions to bring Horus to justice at Istvaan V. The first wave would include Ferrus Manus's Iron Hands, Vulcan's Salamanders, and Korax's Raven Guard. The second wave would follow closely: the Alpha Legion, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, and a large contingent of Word Bearers already nearby. A fleet from Dorn's own Imperial Fists was also dispatched to verify Garrow's testimony, but became stranded by warp turbulence. The other legions, however, made rapid progress. Their journey was swift, too swift. In hindsight, the perfect timing, the precise order of arrival, and the obstruction of the Imperial Fists seemed more than coincidence. It was as if some dark puppeteer pulled the strings from beyond the veil, directing the Loyalist fleet into a carefully laid snare. At this point, Horus's betrayal was still viewed through a murky lens. Many speculated on its cause: madness, alien possession, some arcane force like the Crave or Enslavers. But none doubted the necessity of action. The Imperium judged the rebellion a threat more grave than any faced during the Great Crusade. Though some thought Horus might only be seeking his own empire, the swift and brutal response was deemed essential, and Istvaan, strategically vital yet distant, made for an ideal stronghold, or a perfect trap. As the Loyalist fleet neared Istvaan V, astropathic reports confirmed what long-range scans had already suggested. A massive fortress was being constructed at the Urgal Plateau. Mechanicum engines toiled endlessly. The banners of Horus and Fulgrim flew above the ruins. The War Master had made his stand. Curiously, the traitor fleet was absent. For many, this was a cause for hope. It suggested the enemy was unprepared, scrambling for reinforcements. Ferrus Manus saw opportunity. With the Eisenstein's escape and Fulgrim's betrayal, the Imperium had been alerted before Horus was ready. The Iron Hands Primarch believed a swift, decisive assault could end the heresy before it grew. Others agreed. The time to strike was now. The traitors were still building their defenses. Their forces were divided. The Loyalists could descend in overwhelming force and crush Horus's ambitions before they took root. But they had been deceived. The battlefield was set. The trap was sprung. The first wave of Loyalists would land, and the true war of the Horus Heresy would begin in blood. And then there was Horus, the former War Master of the Imperium, the brightest star and greatest of the Emperor's sons. He stood watching the destruction while his legions took to the field, their liege lord content in his fortress, rising far from the edge of the ravine. The Loyalists had landed with fury, and though they fought like heroes of ancient myth, their victory came at a terrible cost. The Urgal Depression, now secured as a makeshift drop site, was soaked with blood and littered with the broken shells of war machines. The Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamanders had struck deep and hard, delivering a blow the War Master would not forget. But the price was mounting. What was meant to be a decisive strike was quickly becoming something far more dreadful, a battle of annihilation. Hundreds of thousands of Astartes warriors clashed on Istvaan V, brother against brother, in a slaughter without comparison. It was the kind of battle that rewrote the nature of war itself. The lines wavered. For every trench gained, another was lost. Every push was countered by a vicious blow. The sands of Istvaan turned black, then red, and then the color of death itself. Tens of thousands of Space Marines fell within hours. Some shattered by bolter fire, others crushed beneath the treads of tanks, or incinerated by the hellish plasma weapons of the Dark Mechanicum. Human auxiliaries, those few mortals unfortunate enough to accompany the legions, found themselves breaking beneath the sheer pressure of the psychic and physical carnage. Some fell to their knees in mute terror. Others snapped entirely, driven mad by the scale of it, and were gunned down by their comrades to prevent chaos spreading through their lines. Yet amid the horror, the Loyalists pressed forward. The traitor line began to buckle under the relentless assault. Victory seemed within reach. And then came the Titans. From the rear of the Urgal Depression, the air shimmered with heat and static as a massive crimson droplander descended through the smoke-choked skies, trailing fire and fury in its wake. Anti-aircraft fire traced black scars across its armored hull, but it still came. The Legio Adoris, the Firebrand's Titan Legion, had arrived. The Firebrands had not come in ignorance. Their augur showed the enemy was ready. Legio Mortis, the Death Heads, stalked forward from the desert waves in terrible silence, their own titans advancing with the inevitability of doom. But the Firebrands cared nothing for odds. Their grudge with the traitorous Mortis ran deep. They had come not just for war, but for reckoning. With a soul-shaking wail of war horns, the Titans of Legio Adoris strode into battle. They became the first Loyalist Titan Legion to clash with traitor counterparts in the Heresy. Their assault was brutal, brilliant, and final. Though they were annihilated to a machine, the Firebrands took the Mortis reinforcements with them, and in doing so, they shattered a key traitor flanking maneuver. The Iron Hands armored subjugator group swooped in on the remnants and finished what the Titans had started. The Urgal Depression was no longer a battlefield. It was a meat grinder. Every square meter churned beneath the boots of 10,000s of warriors and the treads of tanks. At the heart of the carnage, the Primarchs fought as living legends. Corvus Corax soared above the fray, black wings cutting through smoke, descending like a predator upon his prey. Ferrus Manus thundered forward, his necrodermis hands crushing skulls and armor alike, dragging traitors back into the storm when they tried to flee. Vulcan, towering and grim, laid about him with a warhammer that roared like thunder, each blow sending shockwaves through traitor lines. Their traitorous counterparts answered the challenge in kind. Angron, a hurricane of violence, tore through the loyalists with his chain axes in a berserker trance, uncaring who died. Fulgrim, graceful and hideous, danced through the blood, laughing as he parried blow after blow with his demon-kissed blade. Mortarion, death made flesh, moved like a wraith, his scythe reaping lives in a silent, methodical harvest. And Horus, the architect of this madness, watched from afar. He stood atop the black spires of the alien-built fortress, rising at the ravine's edge, unmoved and unseen. His armies bled and killed for his dream, and their sacrifices pleased him. At last, above this maelstrom of grinding ceramite, booming tank cannons, and shattering bolters, the gunships, drop pods, and assault landers of the second Loyalist wave burned through the atmosphere on screaming thrusters. The sky fell dark as the weak sun was eclipsed by 10,000 avian shadows, and the cheering roar sent up by the Loyalists at the arrival of their comrades was loud enough to shake the air itself. Like fiery comets from the heavens, the thrusters of countless dropships, landers, and assault craft broke through the fire-shot clouds of smoke and descended to the Loyalist landing zone on the northern edge of the Urgal Depression. Descending with all the pomp of heroes came the Alpha Legion, Word-Bearers, Night Lords, and Iron Warriors. Names still spoken with reverence, symbols still painted with the colors of the Emperor. The Loyalists welcomed them, and the traitors smiled. At once, the traitor legions shifted, falling back in an orderly, calculated withdrawal. Ferrus Manus, driven by righteous fury and wounded pride, ignored the cautious words of Korax and Vulcan. He surged forward with his elite Morlocks, Terminators, Dreadnoughts, all crashing toward the enemy in a reckless bid to reach Fulgrim himself. He did not know that the jaws of the trap were about to close. The second wave came down in glory. Stormbirds and thunderhawks by the hundreds screamed through the poisoned skies of Istvaan V, their hulls polished and shining like the promise of salvation. They touched down on the northern ridge of the Urgal Depression, deploying with perfect formation and eerie precision. But these warriors, these so-called brothers, had not come to save. They had already cast their oaths in shadow, pledging their blades to chaos and to Horus. The Night Lords, under the pale-eyed shadow of Conrad Kurz. The Iron Warriors led by cold and calculating Perturabo. The Word-Bearers, bearing the word of Lorgar Aurelian. And the Alpha Legion, enshrouded in lies, commanded by the elusive Alfarius. The second host was larger than the first, fresh and untouched. Their armor bore no scratches, their eyes no fatigue. But they arrived as executioners. The Iron Warriors secured the high ground immediately, building fortifications beneath the pretense of reinforcement. Prefab bunkers crashed into the soil from bulk landers, slammed into place by carrier claws. Servitors marched from the holds, linking weapon systems, powering automated turrets, and transforming the drop site into a fortified kill zone. To the west, the Word-Bearers formed a solid flank. On the east, Night Lords took position, their raptors and war engines bristling for war. Down the growing line of battle tanks and assembling legionaries, First Captain Sevatar of the Night Lords and his elite Atramentar held fast in grim silence. It was a theater prepared for slaughter. The anvil was set and the hammer raised. The Loyalists would run bleeding and broken straight into the teeth of betrayal. And all the while the trap stayed hidden in plain sight. And it was Korax who spoke first. Withdraw, he urged. Let the second wave take the lead. The Raven Guard had bled dry. Vulcan agreed. His salamanders had faced hell itself against the Death Guard and could give no more. The wounds of the Loyalists were deep, their ammo near spent, their warriors exhausted beyond measure. Together, dragging their wounded and carrying their dead, Korvax and Vulcan began pulling their legions back to the drop site to regroup, resupply, and to survive. They sent out hails, Vox signals begging for aid, requesting Medicae assistance and fresh ammunition. But the reinforcements said nothing. 100 meters from their brothers, the first wave drew near, and still only silence. And then the sky cracked. From within the black alien fortress that served as Horus's lair, a lone flare shot high, bursting into a crimson blossom that painted the heavens with betrayal. Guns roared. 1,000 barrels opened fire. Bolters screamed and missiles shrieked as the allies of the second wave unleashed death upon their unsuspecting kin. The Raven Guard and Salamanders fell by the hundreds in the opening salvo, then by the hundreds more in the seconds that followed. On the field below, the retreating forces of the first wave turned and fired. The trap was now fully sprung. World Eaters, Death Guard, and Sons of Horus turned their weapons inward, crashing into the elite Iron Hand veterans at close range. The warriors of Medusa, stubborn and unyielding, fought like wounded gods. But they were outnumbered, surrounded. The Iron Hands would not survive. The front line of the Raven Guard crumbled, shredded by bolter shells and las fire. Black armored warriors collapsed by the score, heads and chests blown apart in sprays of blood and ceramite. As survivors crawled through the gore, they were finished off in brutal silence by merciless volleys from bastion turrets and predator cannons. Word-bearers to the west unleashed hell from their land raiders and siege tanks. 3 figures stood atop an ornate command tank, its hull adorned with bronze banners and cursed scripture. Kor Pharaon, master of the faith. Erebus, the fallen architect of Horus's damnation. And towering above them both, Lorgar, wide-eyed and reverent, watched his brothers murder each other. Fulgrim and Ferris, locked in a furious duel, drew his attention. Their blades flashed in the sun like echoes of lost brotherhood. For a moment, Lorgar faltered. A seed of doubt stirred in him. But Kor Pharaon's whispers smothered it, and Lorgar gave the order. The word-bearers charged. At point-blank range, they butchered the Raven Guard and Salamanders. Tanks and dreadnoughts that had survived hours of nightmare warfare exploded in gouts of flame and shrapnel. The Night Lords descended like shadows, raining phosphex and cluster bombs. Raptors screamed through the skies in mad joy. Behind the lines, the Alpha Legion struck with surgical precision, slaughtering apothecaries and support crew without mercy. Iron Warrior siege batteries opened fire. The Stor Bazash guns spoke. Whirlwinds, Minotaurs, Cerberus tanks. Artillery laid waste to Loyalist positions, tearing through Imperial Army battalions and drop zones. The sky fell, and the Loyalists fell with it. The battle was lost, the betrayal complete. Among the Loyalist leaders, hope now fought with despair. Vulcan, ever the bastion, urged retreat, to fall back to the dropships and hold the perimeter. Corax disagreed. There was no time to entrench, no strength to resist. They had to flee, now. They split. As Corax turned his legion toward escape, a precision artillery strike hit the Primarch's position. By miracle or fate, Corax survived, but Vulcan was gone, his fate unknown amid the chaos and flame. Elsewhere, the massacre raged. The Iron Hands, caught too deep within the lines, died to a man. And at the heart of the bloodstorm, two gods clashed. Ferrus Manus, war-forged son of Medusa, led his Morlocks through the broken walls of the fortress before the second wave had arrived. Their blackened armor dripped with enemy blood. Fulgrim stood above them, his perfect smile gone, now twisted in a quiet sorrow. The Morlocks crashed into the Phoenix Guard like a black tide. Lightning claws crackled, halberds flashed, armor shattered in storms of fire and metal. Amid this, two brothers closed in on each other. Ferrus with Fireblade, Fulgrim with Forgebreaker. The very weapons they had once gifted each other in love, now were wielded in hatred. They fought as only Primarchs could. Ferrus struck like a living inferno, hammering Fulgrim with blow after blow. Fulgrim matched him. The hammer once crafted for Ferrus now turned against its maker. Their armor tore, their flesh bled. Sparks flew from each meeting of steel. At last, Ferrus saw the truth. They were outnumbered. They were betrayed. And still he fought on. The final moments came swiftly. Fulgrim, pushed to his limit, drew a silver blade. Not just any weapon, but the demon-infused sword of Slaanesh, stolen from Larion. With unholy power surging through him, Fulgrim turned the tide. The blade pierced Ferrus's armor. The Iron Hands Primarch fell to one knee, Fireblade slipping from his grasp. Fulgrim raised the demon blade to end him, and hesitated. For a heartbeat, he saw the monster he'd become. The lies, the corruption, the ruin. He fought against the sword, against his own arm, but he could not stop. Ferrus, gasping, reached for Fireblade. Flames reignited in his grip. Too slow. The sword fell, and in an arc of silver fire, Fulgrim decapitated his brother. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon of Medusa, died beneath the weapon of his most beloved brother. The Iron Hands would never recover, and the Horus Heresy had only just begun. While Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus crossed blades in one corner of Istvaan V, another storm of blood was breaking loose on the opposite front. The Raven Guard, weary and battle-scarred, found themselves face to face with a new threat, the traitorous word-bearers. At their head stood not only their crimson-armored brethren, but a trinity of darkness. Primarch Lorgar, First Captain Cor Phaeron, and First Chaplain Erebus. The clash was immediate and brutal, brother against brother in bitter fury. Then came the Galvorbak, Astartes who had surrendered their very souls to demonic possession. These crimson warriors were Lorgar's blessed sons, monsters wrapped in ceramite and wrath. They descended upon Corvus Corax with hunger in their eyes and unholy strength in their limbs. But against the Raven, their numbers meant nothing. Corax, Primarch, Ghost, Predator, was a whirlwind of death. His black talons sang through air and flesh alike, cutting down the possessed warriors as though they were but children. Lorgar watched in horror as his finest creations were eviscerated before him. And when the last of the Galvorbak stood teetering on the brink of destruction, the Urizen himself intervened, shielding what remained of his sons from final death. But Corax was no longer bound by restraint. He became wrath incarnate. No rage, no anger. It was something far purer. A raven storm torn loose from the skies. He surged through the word-bearers' ranks, killing with effortless fury, a blur of shadow and talon. Over the Vox, the dying screamed for salvation, their pleas dissolving into static and blood. Argel Tau, leader of the Galvorbak, and Crimson Lord of Lorgar's vision, stepped forward to meet his fate. He would not die a coward. Meanwhile, Lorgar mirrored his brother's fury. Gone was the scholar priest. What remained was a storm of Crozius and contempt. Yet as the Raven Guard fell, their black bodies shattered beneath his wrath. The word-bearers too faltered before Corax. Then Lorgar froze. Across the field, Corax was tearing through the Galvorbak like parchment. His warriors fled before him, leaving behind their dead in drifts across the soil. Cor Phaeron and Erebus barked warnings, but Lorgar ignored them. With a cry of defiance, the Urizen broke into a sprint. Over corpses, over soil, over the broken remnants of what had once been a brotherhood. For 2 centuries, he had barely spoken to Corax. They had never been close. But now, watching the Raven Lord annihilate his legion, Lorgar found no desire to convert his brother. there was no dream of enlightenment, only fire in his eyes. And at last, he'd let it burn. For decades, Lorgar had hidden his psychic gifts, afraid of their unpredictability. But now, all restraint vanished. A scream erupted from his soul. Not from his lungs, but from his mind. It reverberated across Istvaan V, into the warp, and into the very stars. Psychic fire wreathed him. Heat radiated from his armor. His mind reached outward, empowered by chaos, unshackled and divine. His sons felt it too. They howled as the change overtook them. Flesh twisted, armor melted into bone. Claws and wings erupted from torsos once noble. The Galvor back became monsters, truly demonic, no longer men. The first of the possessed stood revealed. At the heart of it all, haloed in fire, Lorgar called his brother's name. Corax answered. Not in words, but in the scream of the betrayed. Lightning claws met Crozius. Raven met Heretic as they collided. As the Galvor back mutated behind them, the two Primarchs clashed with impossible fury. Corax fought to kill. Lorgar fought to survive. Talons carved and Crozius struck. Amidst the whirlwind, Corax shouted his pain. Why had Lorgar done this? Why betray everything they were? Lorgar, wounded and defiant, spoke his truth. He had seen the Emperor's end, a corpse, golden and eternal, screaming into the void. Corax called it lies and struck his brother across the face, the lightning claws leaving deep, permanent gashes. Blow for blow, the Raven Lord proved superior, faster, sharper, more seasoned in the art of war. Lorgar, ever the preacher, not the soldier, could not match him. Corax drove his claws into Lorgar's abdomen. Talons erupted from the word-bearer's back. Blood gushed. Only when Corax heaved upward, splitting armor and flesh, did Lorgar stumble. The Crozius dropped from his hands, but still he fought. Lorgar grabbed Corax's throat, headbutting him again and again, shattering nose and cheek. But the Raven Lord did not yield. He ripped his claws free, tearing more than just flesh. Lorgar fell to his knees. The Corax stepped forward, one claw raised to deliver the death blow. But another claw caught it. Black eyes met black eyes. Pale skin mirrored pale skin. Two monsters, two brothers. Conrad Kurz had arrived. With one gauntlet, he stopped the killing blow. With the other, he gripped Corax's wrist to stop him from fleeing. Kurz looked down on Lorgar with disdain and ordered him to stand. Corax, ever the predator, fired his flight pack, fuel erupting into jets of fire. The Raven Lord broke free, tearing loose from Kurz's grip and streaking into the sky. Kurz's laughter followed him. Then he shoved Lorgar back toward his legion. I saved you, Kurz growled. But next time, I let you die. Lorgar murmured his thanks, only to be silenced by the sight of what his sons had become. Demonic, twisted, horned and spined, leering skull helms and claws for hands. Rancid, Kurz spat. You're more foul than Lorgar. You're rancid. Elsewhere on the battlefield, the Loyalists were being bled dry. Caught between the second wave's betrayal and the traitors on the front lines, the Salamanders and Raven Guard stood alone. And yet, they were Astartes. They did not yield. They fought like cornered gods. Each death traded for 3 of the enemy. But even then, it was not enough. Iron warriors opened from the drop site, their bunkers and artillery vomiting hell. The Loyalists were trapped in a vice of steel, fire, and murder. Chaos Space Marines surged from the Urgal Hills, word-bearers and Alpha Legionaries casting off loyalty, firing upon their once brethren with gleeful hatred. The Dies Irae, an Imperator-class Titan, strode into battle like a demon of legend. Every cannon blast was an earthquake. Firestorms vaporized squads and melted the desert into glass. Traitor tanks flattened the wounded beneath their tracks, their guns roaring with the madness of betrayal. But still the Loyalists fought. Then came Mortarion, then came Angron, and with them the massacre became complete. Thousands fell beneath their blades, bolstered by the Dies Irae. The traitor legions rampaged through the ranks. At the height of the slaughter, the War Master himself descended. Horus, surrounded by Justerin Terminators, flanked by what remained of the Mournival, he walked like a demigod through fire. Black armor, gold trim, amber sigils burning with power. The killing fields of Istvaan V ran red. Escape was no longer possible. The Iron Warriors had destroyed the Loyalist dropships, and above, the second wave's fleet had turned its guns on the first, annihilating their brothers in orbit. A few Loyalists survive. By miracle or madness, they broke free of the traitor ring. The Raven Guard escaped in greater numbers. The Salamanders less so. But they did not leave alone. Some among them carried Iron Hand survivors with them, refusing to abandon their kin. As for Vulcan, he made his last stand. Surrounded, he and the Salamanders held out until the end. The Iron Warriors, seeking finality, unleashed a tactical nuclear warhead. The blast engulfed all. Vulcan was presumed dead, but he lived. Unconscious and shattered, the Forge Lord of Nocturne was taken by Conrad Kurz, who would torture him for months to come. The Alpha Legion withdrew first. Objectives achieved, whispers trailing their retreat. Behind them, the Iron Warriors' guns fell silent. The victors gathered trophies, performed rituals, and surrendered to madness. Korax escaped, barely. Shot down while fleeing, his gunship crashed outside the Urgal Plateau. On the sands of Istvaan V, over 200,000 Astartes lay dead. One Primarch was slain, 2 others missing. And with them died the Emperor's dream. The battle was over. The killing had stopped. Across the broken desert of the Urgal Depression, the dead were gathered into towering funeral pyres. Thousands of bodies were heaped upon the scorched sands, and the ash-black sky above burned orange with the reflected glow of their mass immolation. Flames danced in mirrored sheets across glassy terrain, while vast pillars of greasy smoke twisted upwards to choke the heavens. Before this infernal backdrop, Horus's victory took form. The tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum, ever tireless in their devotion to progress and heresy, constructed a grand reviewing stand with alarming speed. It rose like a ziggurat from the red sands, a layered construction of obsidian metal and dark geometries, each level narrower than the last, forming a ceremonial pyramid of conquest. As the sun dipped low behind the Urgal hills, its last light bathed the structure in a hellish red. At the base of the stand, the sons of Horus assembled in solemn silence, preeminent and proud. Each Astartes bore a flaming brand, the light flickering off their dark green armor and casting ghostly silhouettes across the massed ranks. Above them, standing on the next level, the senior officers of the 16th Legion looked on with grim satisfaction. And above them still, 7 demigods of war. 7 Primarchs stood blood-smeared and battle-stained, cloaks billowing in the desert winds, their very presence bending the atmosphere like heat over iron. They were monstrous in might, their armor scorched, their faces etched in triumph and ruin alike. Then, upon the summit, alone, radiant and terrible, stood Horus, the War Master, 100 meters above the desert floor. He raised his clawed gauntlet high in silent salute. A furred cloak, torn from the corpse of some long-slain beast, hung from his shoulders. The amber eye of his armor blazed with unnatural light, catching firelight and amplifying it. A hidden lumen bathed him in a crimson glow, so that he stood above his sons not as a commander, but as a god wrought in iron. At his feet, a sea of his followers stretched into the gloom. Then came the thunder. A flight of assault craft screamed over the hills, roaring past the stand with their wings dipped in salute. At once, the massed Astartes below broke into a deafening roar. An ocean of voices raised in adulation. Wave after wave of cheers rose up from 10,000 throats, reverberating like cannon fire against the plateau. The very earth trembled with their cries. Their march began. In perfect formation, legionaries circled the stand. As they passed, they beat their fists against their armored chests, the sounds of their salutes rolling like war drums. And then, at some unseen signal, a spark ignited on the slope of the depression. Flames raced along the sand in a serpentine arc, tracing out a vast burning sigil. The Eye of Horus. It scorched itself into the earth, a flaming brand to mark the War Master's dominion. Thunderous cheers reached new heights. Super heavy tanks fired skyward in salute. Even the mighty Dies Irae bowed its steel head in reverence. Ash drifted like confetti through the air as the traitor legions cried out their triumph. Hail Horus! Hail Horus! But in the dying echo of that terrible ovation, it became clear the victory was not absolute. Despite the massacre, despite the betrayal, some loyalists had escaped. Small groups had broken out of the tightening noose, slipping through chaos and dust storms to vanish into the volcanic wilds. Some fled aboard stolen or commandeered gunships in the confusion. Others faded into the crags beyond the Urgal Plateau, helped unwittingly by their bloodlust of their pursuers, or the disunity among the traitor legions. Even now, bitterness and contempt ran deep between the renegades. In orbit, the betrayal had also ignited. The loyalist fleet had suffered treachery and ambush, but not without resistance. Their ships, void-shielded and battle alert, had absorbed the first blows and struck back. The void battle burned long after the slaughter on the ground had ended. Loyalist warships, scarred and broken, refused to retreat, lingering in orbit even as the odds stacked higher against them. They would not abandon their brothers below. Some fought to the bitter end. Others, crippled but defiant, managed to escape the system, pursued by the traitor fleets with wrath and fire on their heels. They carried away bitter truths and the seeds of vengeance. Istvaan V had fallen, the War Master had won, but the galaxy was far from finished. A firestorm had been ignited, and the whirlwind of galactic civil war had only just begun. The dark gods watched with hungry glee as the first harvest was reaped, knowing that many more would follow. What followed the Dropsite massacre was not a clean execution, but a night of terror, a blood-stained descent into madness and desecration. Imperial records offer only fragments of that first long night, and most of them contradict one another. Some survivors told of traitor Astartes surging across the hills like a tidal wave, shrieking for loyalist blood. Others described deep, thunderous chanting, rolling through the valleys like a living storm, an unholy liturgy that stirred dread in even the strongest of hearts. Still, others spoke of atrocities in the dark, scattered loyalists torn apart by howling packs, their cries lost beneath the droning roar of low-hovering gunships, whose gunners fired into anything that moved, heedless of friend or foe. No one knows how many battles were fought that night. There was no front, no line, no order, only a desperate survival. Each loyalist Astartes waged his own war. The remnants of the Raven Guard were hunted without pause. Their enemies descended on them from above as they moved through cracked ravines, hemmed in by cliffs and fire. Most had no ammunition. They fought with fists, knives, and broken blades. When one brother fell, another turned back to lift him. They carried the wounded, stumbled together through the dark, resisting collapse as the enemy closed in. Time became meaningless. At last, through the black smoke and bloodied haze, the pale sun of Istvaan V rose. Its wan light barely pierced the soot-choked sky, but it was enough. Enough to see that some of the Raven Guard had made it. They had broken free, just barely, and found shelter in the maze-like canyons beyond the Urgal Hills. But while Corax and his sons fled into the shadows, the fate of others was far worse. Those loyalist legionaries who remained behind, trapped in the teeth of the traitor war machine, were butchered methodically. The battlefield was no longer a place of war. It was a killing ground. The traitors hunted the wounded like beasts, dragging broken bodies from under shattered vehicles and delivering death again and again. Some tortured the dying for sport. Others desecrated the battlefield. The World Eaters gave themselves fully to savagery. They decapitated the dead and dying, flensed the flesh from their skulls, and heaped the remains into vast ossuary cairns, monuments of bone and filth. The word-bearers enacted their own dark rites and rituals, now known to the Imperium only in whispered warnings, foul with spiritual corruption. And then came a final violation. Tens of thousands of fallen Astartes, heroes, brothers, champions, all had their progenoid glands carved from their corpses, gene seed ripped from their ruined bodies, stolen for some fell purpose no loyalist dared imagine at the time. It was a desecration, a theft of legacy, of bloodlines, and of the Emperor's dream. Tech thralls and servitors scoured the wastelands for the remaining Raven Guard. Found corpses were stripped, living captives tortured by word-bearers and Emperor's children. And yet the Raven Guard continued to resist, sniping, sabotaging, striking in shadows. But it was still just a drop in the ocean. But then Corax saw an opportunity. A small Iron Warriors column strayed too far. The Raven Guard struck, annihilating it and tasting vengeance. But something worse emerged. Blind hunters. Mechanicum constructs designed to track and kill. Corax pressed on, ambushing a second column in the rifts. He personally slew a dreadnought from his past, signaling the massacre. None of the Iron Warriors escaped. Soon after, scouts warned of a third column near their sanctuary. Corax rallied every fighter. The battle was brutal but decisive. The Iron Warriors were shattered. Black rain fell as the blind hunters howled. The Raven Guard regrouped, sheltering from the toxic storm in their hidden lair. Then, Corax vanished. He walked alone, unseen through enemy territory. What he witnessed he never spoke of. When he returned, his orders were simple. they must endure. Not for vengeance, but because as long as one of them lived, the enemy could never rest. The rain passed, leaving a toxic fog that scarred the flesh and soul. The Legion endured, but not unchanged. Hollow-eyed, clad in scavenged armor, they became ghosts of war. On the 40th day, the word-bearers returned, led by Alexis, who sought personal glory by rooting out the Raven Guard himself. He walked into a trap. Corax allowed them to penetrate deep into the ravines before unleashing his legion. Ambushes erupted from the fog. Hundreds of word-bearers died. A few were taken alive. One was dragged before Corax. What transpired is unknown. But when it ended, new orders spread. Angron was still on Istvaan. He knew Corax lived. And the Butcher of Nuceria was coming. In the hours that followed, the sanctuary was abandoned. The orders were clear. Relocate. Survive. Some within the ranks bristled at the thought of retreat, but their protests died in their throats. The Raven Guard obeyed the Raven Lord. And in that final moment, as their rear guard vanished into the rifts, they looked back to see their haven swallowed in fire. World Eaters, blind hunters, tide of blood and iron, the howling of war horns and the tread of ceramite boots crushed what remained of their sanctuary into ash. From that moment onward, the Raven Guard were prey once more. 80 days of war had cost them hundreds. Their numbers were a fraction of what they had been. Some wounded had taken their own lives rather than burden their kin. Their morale withered to grim silence. Yet they fought on, because they had no choice. Driven east by firestorms and tanks, bracketed by Scorpius and whirlwind missile fire, the Raven Guard fled deeper into the Ilium rifts. The salt plains loomed ahead, bleached, lifeless, and toxic, even to a space marine. The World Eaters were closing in behind. The noose was tightening. It was the 98th day when they reached the last rise. Behind them, death. Before them, oblivion. The Raven Guard, 3,000 strong, faced the oncoming storm. The blackened winds howled. The plains hissed with chemical vapors. And from the west came Angron, roaring, his suns pouring across the horizon like a tidal wave of rage. Corax gave the final order. Stand. They would die here. There would be no hope, no escape, and no reinforcements. But then, the heavens split. Black-winged dropships, fire spitting from their bellies, descended through the clouds like wrathful angels. Bombs screamed from the sky. Plasma scorched the ranks of the World Eaters. Drop pods slammed into the rock, bearing the sigil of the Raven Guard. And from them came salvation. Commander Braun, the Therian cohort, a miracle forged from one man's dreams and another's faith. They had crossed the galaxy to arrive at this moment, this final heartbeat before annihilation. Corax did not know how, He would never know why, but the Raven Guard lived. They boarded the ships and escaped. Angron raged as fire and fury swallowed the mountainside. Once again, his prize had slipped through his grasp. The Raven Guard were broken, the salamanders were lost, the Iron Hand shattered. Yet what few loyalists survived Istvaan V brought with them the truth of Horus's treachery, and the terrible knowledge that 8 legions now stood against the Emperor. Korax returned to Terra, grievously wounded. Vulcan vanished into myth. The traders gathered their strength. Machinery looted, material reforged, fleets swelled, and plotted their next moves. The Thousand Suns had joined them. The Alpha Legion had infiltrated the survivors. The Schism of Mars had begun. The heresy had become much more than just a spark. It was wildfire. And for the Raven Guard, forged in rebellion, tempered by betrayal, and redeemed by survival, there would be no rest, only vengeance, and only war. The fires, the Horus Heresy, had only just began to burn when Lorgar, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, gave his most trusted lieutenants, Erebus and Cor Phaeron, a grim command. Bring ruin to the realm of Ultramar. It was more vengeance than a simple act of war. 43 standard years earlier, the Word-Bearers had suffered humiliation. On the Emperor's orders, Rabute Guilliman and his Ultramarines had forced the 17th Legion to kneel in disgrace upon the world of Kur. Now, the debt would be repaid in blood. The Word-Bearers had learned of a vulnerability. The pride of Guilliman's fleet, ancient battleships forged in the shipyards of Mars, were anchored and exposed. Yet, to maintain the illusion of their presence in the Veridius system, Lorgar ordered the majority of his fleet to gather at Kolth. But a single battle would not be enough. Kolth alone could not doom the 13th Legion. To truly break the Ultramarines, the traitor armada had to fracture the realm itself. The 500 worlds would burn. And to that end, the fleet was divided into at least half a dozen task forces, spreading like venom through the arteries of Ultramar. As the Battle of Kolth began, Lorgar himself, joined by Angron and the blood-drenched World Eaters, launched a second offensive, the infamous Shadow Crusade. Though it held fewer ships, this force possessed apocalyptic firepower. The Trisagian, the Blessed Lady, the Fidelitas Lex, and Angron's own flagship, the Conqueror. Their target, the war world of Armatura, the beating heart of Guilliman's empire. Meanwhile, Captain Zadkiel arrived with the colossal Furious Abyss, launching a doomed assault on Macragge. Erebus and Cor Phaeron led the main Word-Bearer fleet to Kolth, spearheaded by Erebus's Destiny's Hand, and Cor Phaeron's battle barge, still transmitting its old name, Raptorus Rex. though it now bore the mark of heresy. Infidus Imperator. Who exactly devised the atrocity that would become at Kolth? None can say. The crimes of Lorgar and Horus are so many that one more scarcely matters. But the seeds had been planted long before even Istvaan. On the War Master Horus's orders, legions were dispatched far from Terra. The Blood Angels were sent to Cygnus. The Dark Angels to Salvoes. The Ultramarines, under the illusion of an orc threat, were to muster at Kolth alongside the Word-Bearers. Gathering his distant forces at Saturn, Guilliman departed the Sol system mere months before news of Horus's betrayal reached the Emperor. The warp, already turbulent, would delay communication and shield the Ultramarines from early warnings. By the time the Word-Bearers arrived, delayed by their slaughter at Istvaan, the 13th Legion had assembled in full. The traitors came cloaked in false friendship, but with blood on their hands and hatred in their hearts. The Battle of Kolth erupted. Though the Ultramarines fought valiantly and even claimed victory in the end, they would not taste it. As one final act of cruelty, the Word-Bearers poisoned the Viridius star. Its solar winds were corrupted. Kolth's atmosphere destabilized. The surface became deadly to unprotected mortals. The population was forced into subterranean arcologies. Shelter, such as it was, came underground. From across Ultramar, cries for help poured in. The attack on Kolth had not been a single betrayal. It was part of a sector-wide invasion. Guilliman, with sudden clarity, understood the depth of the treachery. The Word-Bearers had sought to exterminate the Ultramarines. They had failed. Though crippled, the 13th Legion still stood, and Rabute Guilliman's vengeance would be terrible. But, just as he prepared for retaliation, worse news came still. The warp was surging. A storm, vast and ancient, was coiling around the Viridius system. Vessels that did not depart would be stranded for years, if not decades. The Ultramarines' fleet was in ruins. Desperate salvage operations were launched, costing many lives. But Guilliman knew that they had to leave. As his ships pulled away, the Primarch made a vow. He would return to Kolth. He would cleanse it. And though it would take many years and countless battles, he kept that promise. Ultramar would endure. Nearly half the Ultramarines' Legion was dead or crippled after Kolth. The ruin storm had severed all communication and travel. The 500 worlds now stood alone. Yet pockets of strength remained. The 19th, 24th, and 25th chapters had been spared Kolth's carnage. and were now scattered across Ultramar. But they faced new horrors. World Eaters, Word Bearers, and abyssal warships descended on their worlds with fury. Kor Pharaon had his own plan, strike at the heart. While Lorgar and Angron ravaged the edges, the massive, furious abyss would destroy Macragge. Its mission was simple: survive the planet's defenses, enter orbit, and unleash virus bombs to obliterate the surface. Then it would join others to burn the core worlds of Ultramar. But fate intervened. A daring strike force of Ultramarines and Space Wolves boarded the furious abyss. They gave their lives, but they destroyed the ship from within. Without its support, the assault on Macragge failed. On some worlds, like Astagar, the Ultramarines held. There, Lucretius Corvo commanded only 600 warriors. Yet when the traders arrived, 5 cruisers and their escorts, he met them with fire. The initial fleet clash cost the invaders dearly. Then came the ground assault. Corvo defended the capital, Earthimia Civitas. Though pushed back, they identified the enemy's heart, a demon-possessed warlord titan. With cunning tactics and shadow sword fire, the monstrous engine was destroyed. Its death shattered the trader morale, and the counterattack was swift. The Loyalists drove the enemy from Astagar completely. Far within the Percepton system of Ultramar, the skies above Perceptum Primus darkened as the word-bearers fell upon the world like a curse. In just 27 solar minutes, the opening attack crippled more than half of the Ultramarine starships. And yet, the battle would not end quickly. For 163 Terran days, the world burned. On the ground, what began as a campaign of armored assaults soon devolved into brutal, bloody hand-to-hand combat. The word-bearers descended in a storm of thunderhawks and stormbirds. Their vehicles, rhinos, land raiders, vindicators, fellblades, and typhons, churning the surface to ruin. The skies thundered with their wrath. The ground quaked beneath their war machines. Decimus, master of the 17th chapter of the Ultramarines, stood resolute, leading his warriors through the chaos. But it went poorly. Demonic whispers corrupted their Vox networks, silencing communication. Enemy titans, unchallenged after destroying Loyalist war engines from orbit, tore through his ranks. Knowing the battle was lost, Decimus summoned 5 Ultramarines marked for censure. He offered them a final chance at redemption, a mission that could change the tide in their favor. And they would succeed. Hidden in orbit, one surviving cruiser, the righteous Fury was reached. Its ship mistress agreed to unleash hell upon the world, bombarding it with deadly phosphex. The Censured Five were hunted down and killed before they could return, but their sacrifice was not in vain. Fire rained from the heavens, burning loyalist and traitor alike. As this grim retribution fell, Decimus gathered every remaining Ultramarine for a final stand. Before them loomed thousands of ward-bearers, dreadnoughts, and tanks arrayed in strength. But above them came fire, bright and unrelenting death. Some of the warriors believed it was the arrival of reinforcements, but Decimus knew the truth. In quiet confession, he told them the planet could not be held, that this was the end. Yet in their last moments, he filled them with pride and fury. They charged one final time into the ranks of their enemies. His fire consumed them all. Elsewhere, the main thrust of the Shadow Crusade swept like a scythe across Ultramar. Over 100 worlds fell before the combined might of Lorgar and Angron. And then they came to Armatura, the war world at Ultramar's heart. In the shattered streets of its ruined capital, the Ultramarines laid a trap. As the frenzied World Eaters stormed through the wreckage, buildings collapsed around them, burying many warriors and even Angron himself beneath mountains of stone. His sacred chain axes, Gore Father and Gore Child, failed him. Their teeth shattered as Angron dug his way free. Crawling from the tomb of rubble, cast them aside. Gore Child would be taken up by Karn, Angron's equerry, who dared to have it reforged, despite the Gene Father's superstitions. From that day forward, Karn would bear it into battle. But Lorgar had seen something deeper. Angron's instability was worsening, his mind breaking beneath the weight of the butcher's nails. The implants were killing him, faster than anyone had realized. And so Lorgar made a promise. Together, they would return to Nicaria. There, where the nails were first hammered into Angron's skull, they would learn all there was to know. And then they would burn the world that made him suffer. It mattered not if Angron hated him. Lorgar would drag his brother to immortality, into the service of the Dark Gods, whether Angron wished it or not. Rabute Gilliman's retribution fleet, battered but resolute, tracked the traitors to Nicaria. At the edge of the system, his flagship, Courage Above All, emerged from the warp, leading 41 vessels stitched together from scattered fleets. But this was far more than a piecemeal war fleet. It was a spear aimed at vengeance. Gilliman had come to bring justice to Lorgar and the World Eaters. As his cruisers and battleships engaged the enemy fleet in broadsides, others broke away, launched launching lances and gunships to force a landing on Nuceria itself. Against this tide, Lotara Sauron, captain of the Conqueror, fought with unmatched fury, crippling many ships and resisting all attempts to board. And yet, still the Ultramarines came. Drop pods slammed into the earth, disgorging warriors clad not in pristine cobalt blue, but in scarred, scorched armor. Veterans of Koth, hungry for vengeance. On the surface, the battle was madness. Ultramarines seized footholds, while the World Eaters howled through them in a tide of blood and steel. The word-bearers, ever chanting, advanced behind their banners of bone and desecration. Above it all, the wreck of the Philentalis Rex began its descent. The once mighty flagship burned as it fell, crashing into Nuceria's ocean with a thunderous roar. And on the field, two Primarchs met. Guilliman and Lorgar clashed. No words, no warning. A fist against a maul. Lightning flared as power fields collided. Around them suns died, but they did not look away. Blow for blow they fought, a storm of strength, fury, and hatred. Guilliman struck first, caving in Lorgar's chest with a thunderous punch. Lorgar reeled, then lashed back, his Crozius hammering into Guilliman's face and shattering his skull in blood. Both Primarchs bled, both refusing to fall. Then came the third. Angron burst through the carnage, his chainsword shrieking, his blood-slicked armor a monument to slaughter. Hours he had spent amidst the butchery, and he wore the skulls of his dead kin strapped across his chest. A bandolier of skulls, taken from the mass grave at Deshalika Ridge, where his fellow gladiators had fallen long ago. Each bone was stained in blood, their surfaces painted as vividly as the warriors who bore them. Even through the constant, needling torments of the butcher's nails, the sight of them stirred something close to satisfaction within Angron. These were the eaters of cities, his kin, his fallen brothers and sisters. Now, their hollow eyes bore silent witness as he carried them into battle once more, letting them see the destruction of Nuceria's proud, towering cities. Let them see vengeance at last. As the clash of three Primarchs shook the battlefield, Guilliman struck Angron with a glancing blow. His power fist slammed into the warlord's breastplate, cracking it, and one of the skulls hanging there fractured under the impact, fragments of ancient bones scattering to the earth. Guilliman stepped back. His armored boot landed square upon the skull's shattered remains, grinding them into powder. Angron saw. In that moment, fury overcame everything else. With a bellow that was more than a roar, something ancient, wounded and boundless in its rage, he hurled himself at his brother. The scream he loosed defied mortal origin, steeped in pain deeper than any weapon could inflict. Lorgar saw it too. The instant Gilliman's boot shattered the skull beneath him, something within the veil of reality twisted. The warp boiled like water under flame. The bearer of the word closed his eyes and began to chant, not in any known tongue, but in a language that had never been spoken aloud by any living being. His voice rose in perfect harmony with Angron's scream, a sound forged from pain, memory, and wrath. This was the moment Lorgar had long prepared for. He enacted his dark and terrible plan to save his mutilated brother from the slow, inevitable death of the butcher's nails. He tore open the sky above Nucaria. The veil ripped apart, and from it poured a crimson torrent, a ruin storm born from the ghosts of 100 murdered worlds. Blood rained down upon the battlefield in thick sheets, soaking earth and armor alike. The air howled with the arrival of the Neverborn, demons as humanity would know them. Lorgar's will reached out across the warp, seizing Angron in the midst of battle. He locked his brother's muscles, setting fire to the synapses in his brain. Angron's body convulsed violently. His blood shifted from iron to quicksilver, from quicksilver to molten fire. At last, to something else entirely, something divine. His howls of rage gave way to screams of transcendent agony as his form began to change. Muscles tore and reformed. Bones shattered and stretched. A lifetime of torture was undone and rewritten into monstrous glory. Angron ascended. From a shell of pain and fury, the demon prince emerged, perfected, apotheosized. But not all in the 12th Legion bowed to Lorgar's design. 19 librarians, those rare world eaters who had never been given the nails, spared only because their psyker minds would not survive the implant, felt the unnatural pressure ripple across the warp. In desperation, they joined their psychic minds into a gestalt entity known as the Communion. And they struck. As Lorgar's ritual neared completion, the Communion wrenched Angron's soul from his body, dragging it into the Immaterium to confront the Urizen himself. Within that unreal place, the soul of a broken son and the will of a dark prophet collided. Both sought to save Angron. Both believed their path righteous. But the Communion failed. Lorgar, born of Kolkis and strengthened by the truth of the warp, was no less mighty within the Immaterium than he was in the material realm, and his will prevailed. Angron, now reborn as a demon prince of Khorne, turned his gaze to the Psykers who had dared to defy his transformation. For decades, their very presence had made the butcher's nails scream in his skull. Now filled with even more hate and power, he descended upon them. He tore through them with godlike rage. Each librarian died a different death, some swift, others unspeakably slow. And when the last had fallen, the librarius of the 12th Legion was extinguished. Khorne was pleased. Lorgar had offered the 12th Legion to the Blood God, and the offering was complete. From that day forward, the World Eaters would live for nothing but the joy of war. There would be no tactics, no brotherhood, no mercy, only blood. Guilliman, wounded, bleeding, and weary to the core of his soul, escaped New Caria. He had seen what his brothers had become. He could not understand it, and he certainly could not fight it. Not yet. Angron gave the order, and the World Eaters scoured New Caria of life. City by city, they erased all trace of humanity from the world that had birthed her Primarch. When it was done, Angron left without a glance back. The bones of his kin were ash. The chains of his past were broken. The dust of New Caria fell away from his boots, never to be thought of again. Lorgar stood among the blood and flame, convinced he had done what none other would. He had saved his brother, saved him from pain, from weakness, from death. The Shadow Crusade would march once more. The ruin storm had opened the path, and ahead of them lay Terra. The end had only just begun.